Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us at this session today. I must say it's fantastic to see a mix of genders in the room. As you can imagine, often panels entitled Women in Climate have a very specific audience. But what you will hear from us today is that if we are to solve the climate crisis, we must hear from everybody and fast. It's an absolute delight today to have, I must say, some friends of mine on stage with us. She Changes Climate, if you've not heard of it, is an incredible campaigning organisation. And in one way or another, we've all got to know each other a lot through COVID, actually, through our connection to it. So Antoinette is the co-founder of She Changes Climate. And Rebecca, Georgia and I met at COP26 in Glasgow, when She Changes Climate held one of the most incredible events I've ever been to, which was the takeover of an old warehouse, 4 floors, completely filled with women who are campaigning and changing the world across every issue from soil to fashion. And so today, what we're going to talk to you about is really about the need for inclusion in solving the climate crisis. And I today am coming with one of my many hats that I wear, which is a UK chapter lead for She Changes Climate. Much of the work that I do at Warrior Group is to really move past the discussion of diversity alone to inclusion. I'm sure in this audience right now we have people who are tackling everything from rewilding to human trafficking to carbon emissions. And in all of those issues, we need to include voices less heard in order to innovate and chart a new path forward. And so in this session today, we're going to be hearing from Antoinette about She Changes Climate's work and why diversity for decision-making is absolutely vital. We'll also be hearing from Rebecca at the end there about her work and the important role of women in food systems. And last but no means least, the fantastic Georgia Elliott-Smith will be talking to us about how women in the UK are changing the construction sector. So welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Antoinette, it would be great to hear a bit about She Changes Climate. What does it do, and how is that a link to the climate crisis?
So, thank you. First of all, thank you, and nice to see everyone here, and as you said, a nice gender mix. So, She Changes Climate began, I actually work in marine conservation, that's my main role. And about 3 years ago, we discovered where the UK were hosting COP26, that the entire high-level team was all male. And whilst we may have just shrugged our shoulders, it basically opened our eyes to a problem that is much bigger, which is who is missing at the table, and why are they not there, and who else is missing. So we began a campaign which was two-pronged. The first was to reach out to the COP26 president and presidency, and to Boris Johnson, and to say, you really need to include more women, very naively. And then the other part was to look at all the voices that were missing and find out how we could be a conduit for those people who are the most impacted by climate change and yet do not have the opportunity to really speak about the issues that are affecting them and thus affecting us. Basically, everything's connected. So often I used to say, and you may have heard it, you know, and COP's so boring, who the hell cares about that? But what happens at COP affects all of us.
Absolutely. And why is, I mean, we hear about diversity as almost the right thing to do. Right? So we should have more women, we should have more people of colour, we should have people with neurodiversity at the table. But actually, why is it so important for decision making? Because obviously major decisions are made at COP. Why is diversity important through the lens of that decision making?
I'm going to give you an example of a case where diversity wasn't included, and that was in an earthquake in 2000 in India, where millions of homes were destroyed. And a number of NGOs, banks, everyone came in to help rebuild the homes, and they were very, very happy with them. I think they built 400,000 homes. When the families arrived, there was no kitchen and there was no yard for their poultry, their livestock. It basically was because no women had been included in the decision process. So this is not just, it's an economic problem, but it's so much more important than that. Women have been shown by several reports to have a far more long-term solutions, be far more inclusive, collaborative, and in fact, for women on boards with women on them, they can be up to 5% more profitable. So there are a lot of incentives, and I do want to stress that whilst we are campaigning for women, that is just the arrow that's piercing a balloon to bring in all the missing voices at the table. And when I talk about that, I talk about Indigenous, youth, elders. We really need, the world needs biodiversity, the planet needs biodiversity, and in both cases, we're fading to grey.
And I think diversity of thought is the other diversity that we need, and that so much speaks to it. You know, one of the criticisms, I guess, of the inclusive movement is, what about the men? You know, how do we not exclude men? Because, you know, I often say, and I'm not sure people believe me, but I often say that if all boards were made up of women, I would be campaigning for men to be on them. And I really, really believe that, because I truly believe in diversity of thought. But for the men who have supported She Changes Climate along the way, what have been some of the things that you consistently see them doing that people within their own organisations and campaigning organisations could also model?
So I think it's really important that all of us can take action. And I often talk, I'm about to be a grandmother, and so my son is like, he's the whole diaper world is new. It's like a new frequency. And his eyes have been opened to parenthood, something that he never paid attention to before. I'm sure many of us can relate to that. And the point is that once you open your eyes, it's almost glaring when something is missing. And what we found with men with Gaia principles, because She Changes Climate is not to be exclusive of men, but to be inclusive of women. These are simple things. If you enter into a meeting room and there are no women present, ask why. It's as simple as that. And if you see other male colleagues talking too much and not letting women speak, actually seek out their voices. Make sure that there is fair input by all parties. Also ask, where are the others? We need to be proactive. We are at a time for the planet where we no longer can afford to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. We need different thoughts and different thinking at the table. And I think that this is something where all of us are capable of doing something. And by the way, women as well. You can almost say, hey, hang on, so-and-so wasn't able to speak. We'd love you to hear what you have to say. And some people are shy. We need to encourage them as well and give them space in their way. The final thing is, we don't need women acting as men to be heard. We need women acting and thinking as women. That's where we'll bring real value into a different thoughtscape.
Thank you. Lots of insights there. Rebecca, we have known each other through She Changes Climate, but through you I have also learned a lot about the Hunger Project, and I'm really pleased to be an investor and also an ambassador for that organisation. I think the Hunger Project's work really connected me to what it means to truly empower women in the global south, and how that word is often overused and seems at odds with what those women are capable of. So maybe you can tell us a bit. I know you've just departed as CEO there in the UK, but that's been a big part of your career recently. Maybe you can tell us about the Hunger Project and how they approach inclusion.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those that don't know, the Hunger Project is a global charity. We were founded in the 70s, had around 12 million reach last year, 13 program countries across Africa, South Asia, and Latin America. So really sizable organization doing amazing work. And the premise of it is based on 3 pillars. So mobilizing those communities, so ensuring that everything we do is led by the communities in which live in hunger and poverty. So instead of the traditional West model where we fly in, aid and then leave without any sustainable approach, this is very much developing from the ground up, giving people access to the tools and resources to help themselves. The second principle is to start with women, and women are absolutely pivotal to the work that we do, and it's because that they're not only half the population, but they're hugely important to the agricultural labor force that we have around the world. So in many low and middle income countries, they make up the majority of smallholder farmers that are feeding those communities, and yet their production levels are greatly lower than their male counterparts, actually 20 to 30% less. And that's to no fault of their own. It's through the systemic gender discrimination that women still face around the world, whether that's violence, lack of education, lack of access to the market, to credits, to loans, to training, and more broadly still issues like gender discrimination and child marriage. So there's still really big issues that we tackle at the Hunger Project. And the third pillar is engaging governments and private sectors to really make that sustainable change. So ensuring that they're investing in those communities for the long term rather than the short, quick wins that we might have seen in previous decades.
Recently, I saw a stat which said that women make up 43% of the global agriculture workforce. And I think sometimes we see a lot of terminology where if you're not in that space, you sort of don't think to raise your hand and say, we're all working often in silos. And I thought it might be interesting to just say, what do we mean by global agriculture workforce, and why is women's involvement in that so critical to solving the climate crisis or supporting women in that work?
Yeah, so the majority of those women are smallholder farmers, so that means 80% of the produce coming to feed Africa and lots of low and middle income countries are from smallholder farmers. They play an absolute pivotal role in the food system challenges that we have, and that's why it's really important to invest in women, because if they're making up half of that labour force and yet they're being systematically denied the same rights and access as males, that's a huge issue that we need to face. And actually Oxfam said that if we reach gender equality with our women smallholder producers, then we'd be decreasing hunger by 17%. So it really shows the tangible difference that we can make if we put women's rights ahead of a lot of other issues.
I think that really makes it clear why, again, we talk about, definitely in, Europe and specifically the UK, we talk a lot about women on boards, and often we miss the kind of global south conversation about that. And, my 10-year-old daughter came home from school the other day and said, did you know that pineapples don't grow in England and they come from somewhere else? And it was a really great way to start that conversation about who's growing that pineapple and where it's coming from and what we could be eating instead locally. So listening to you and hearing about how the inclusion of women isn't, again, just the right thing to do, but vital to our food systems, there have been so many stories that have come out from the Hunger Project that have really stayed with me about, again, what it means to empower women. Can you think of an example that maybe those who are based in Eastern Europe here could learn from about how to support smallholder farmers, or kind of a project that the Hunger Project worked on, that a bit like talking about the earthquakes as an example of what good looks like?
Yeah, I mean, because we're community-led, all of our programs vary depending on the countries and the communities in which we work in. Say in Malawi, we work closely with women to ensure that they have access to tech and resources and the connectivity that they need to grow their businesses to ensure that they're thriving and that they can put food on the table. table, to India, where we're doing some really interesting work getting women into leadership positions in their local panchayats, because what we really understand is, and She Changes Climate is a great example of this, is with more women in climate negotiations and leadership positions, the whole of society benefits. They invest more in their communities, their health and well-being, their schooling for their children. So again, there's lots of evidence to say why it's so crucial for women to have a seat at that table.
Thank you so much. And as a segue to that, where we hear that women make up much of that agricultural workforce, it's great to talk about in the UK where construction, where actually it's the opposite. So I believe that we have a real diversity issue, shall we say, in construction. I personally love, for those of you who've watched the Barbie movie, the part of it where she goes to the normal land and walks up to the male construction guys and expects them to all be kind of all about empowerment, which I thought of you a lot whilst watching that. So how long have you worked in construction, and can you tell us a bit about the current situation related to diversity in UK construction, as well as kind of why that's an issue?
Yes, well, I think there's a diversity issue in construction all over the world, as far as I can see. But in the UK at the moment, so I run a business in the UK construction industry. I've worked in construction for 25 years. And I started in a major contracting company back in the 1990s as their first ever environment manager. And, you know, there were very few women around back then. I was definitely an oddity.
I imagine very few conversations about environmentalism, right?
Yes, exactly. So a very young woman coming onto site to talk to all of these guys about how they should change everything that they do to be more environmentally friendly. So you can imagine how well that went. I mean, I was not welcomed onto site, so I learned a lot very, very quickly. And certainly, you know, that picture hasn't changed a great deal since then. So there are still only 15% of the construction workforce is female. And, you know, I think that's a great shame, because I think I love the construction industry. I absolutely love it. It's the most incredible industry where we create things. You know, I walk down the street and look at things and say, you know, I did that. I actually was part of a team that built this incredible thing. And, you know, it's very, very exciting industry, very fast moving, but we do have a real problem. And I think, you know, I've always been interested in this conversation about diversity, and I think I was probably the epitome for some time of that woman who had to become sort of more masculine in order to feel like I could fit in. But when I found my voice, you know, and I mean, my God, I've used it. I've used it a lot. So, yeah. Yeah,
I mean, I know you've changed a lot of laws recently, and you'll change many more, I'm sure. So thank goodness you found your voice young, as it were. One of the things that I've really enjoyed learning from you recently is, even though women make up such a small percentage of construction industry, they're some of the ones who are leading some of the most profound changes. Which is something, I mean, I know some of the examples that I hope you can share with us today about what these changes are far-ranging behind what women are doing and what's happening in the UK, and has many examples for many industries. So maybe you can amplify some of those women in the UK, including yourself, doing this amazing work, and share some case studies that have some good examples for shifting industries.
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, there are some profoundly impactful projects that are going on in the UK at the moment, led by women. One of them is the London Energy Transformation Initiative, LETI. And this is a group of professionals within industry. It was founded by two women who realized that our building regulations meant that we were never going to achieve net zero. They simply were not fit for purpose. And so what they decided to do was to convene a group of engineers, architects, construction professionals, project managers, and so on, and rewrite the building regulations and turn that into an aspirational standard that basically says, if you want to develop a building that is achieving net zero, that is capable of, you know, U values, so insulation standards, mechanical and electrical service standards, standards for different materials, standards for different proportions and the way that we build. And that kind of vision has really changed the industry, because now, if you are a developer in the industry or an architect and you are talking about achieving sustainable buildings, well, you'd better be designing to the LETI standards, because that's really the only way that you're going to do it. It's not through compliance, it's through this group of professionals that did that. And I think what I love about that, and I think it's not a mystery that it was started by two women, because I think what I've identified from that, and certainly in my career, is that when you feel like an outsider, you can see the problems, and you very often walk into a room, and although you may not feel you've got a voice to speak up in that room at that table, you sit there quite often thinking, well, isn't it obvious? Like, I can see what the problem is. Why is nobody talking about it? And I think that's what diversity is for me, is not about men and women or race or culture specifically, but it's that diversity of thought where when you come from a different background and you have a different set of values, you are able to sit at that table and notice things that other people have not noticed. And, and that is something that one initiative is really changing the way we're building in the UK. And now policymakers and government are paying attention, and they're now looking at those standards and starting to incorporate them into our building regulations, which I think is so incredible.
Yeah, wow. I was kind of lost there listening to how incredible that example is.
And there are even more.
I absolutely love the idea of actually the power of being the outsider. I think one of the things that we found from our work at Warrior Group, which is very much about bringing that diversity of thought to organisations, whether or not it's about thinking about the future of food or sustainable transportation, and finding someone from an underrepresented background that can bring that new thinking, is that often the culture isn't always open to thinking differently. And one of the things that I've been so impressed with your work, and also She Changes Climate, is unfortunately it seems to be that there's a time in which people have to take forward the torch and do the work and get to a critical mass that people pay attention to it. And that's why we talk about warrior women, who often do a lot of that, which you three definitely are. I hope that you've learned something from this discussion today. One of the things that we are really focused on at Warrior Group is bringing new thinking, and you can listen to various warriors around the world on climate tech, crime, prison system reform on our podcast. I hope you'll connect with these amazing women and support their work via LinkedIn and other channels. Thank you so much for joining today.